singer!
Yes, I do. I know exactly what I'm saying, and if it's a sedition, then I am guilty of sedition too.
On January 12, 2010, the sky over Port-au-Prince was still carrying the dust of devastation when Madeleine Stowe stepped into the ruins of a collapsed neighborhood, moving past shattered walls and the bitter scent of smoke. Hours earlier, a magnitude 7 earthquake had ripped through Haiti, and now bodies lay covered with sheets, the air trembling with grief. She was not there as a celebrity, not as the once glimmering figure Hollywood remembered, but as a witness searching for a way to help the forgotten. Someone handed her a shovel, and for hours she worked with volunteers, lifting rubble, pulling the unclaimed dead from the dust. Cameras were nowhere, reporters absent. Only the weight of tragedy surrounded her as she knelt beside a young girl whose hand still clutched a broken necklace. In that moment, Madeleine felt a haunting clarity. The world she had once inhabited, spotlights, scripts, applause, felt impossibly distant. She raised her eyes toward the cracked horizon, wondering how a woman who once stood among Hollywood's brightest had found herself in the silent aftermath of catastrophe, helping bury strangers no one else would bury. What happened in her life that led her here? What did she leave behind? And what was she still running from? Welcome to Starlet Mystery. She had begun her life far from this landscape of loss. Born on August 18, 1958, in Los Angeles, Madeleine Marie Stowe grew up in Eagle Rock, a neighborhood where the sun fell differently from Hollywood's glittering skyline. Her father, Robert, fought multiple sclerosis for years, his strength slowly dissolving as the illness tightened around him. Her mother, Myria, carried the weight with quiet resilience, raising Madeleine and her siblings while holding on to memories of her own Costa Rican political ancestry. It was a home shaped by both tenderness and shadow. Young Madeleine learned early that beauty and fragility could coexist. She clung to the piano as if it were a lifeline, practicing for hours, seeking precision in every note. Music was discipline, control, order. It was a world where chaos could not intrude, and where the failures of the body, like her father's, could be momentarily forgotten. But childhood was not a sanctuary. The growing fear of her father's illness seeped into everything. The sound of his labored breathing at night, the tension of watching someone once strong become fragile, carved something deep into her. Fear of loss, fear of helplessness, fear that life could unravel without warning. She poured all of it into her piano, chasing perfection because it was the only thing she could control. Teachers recognized her intensity. Neighbors whispered about her discipline. But at 17, the death of her demanding mentor broke whatever world she had built for herself. When he passed, the silence around the piano became unbearable. She closed the lid, walked away, and let the dream fade. She once said she felt like a ghost drifting through her own youth, caught between ambition and the weight of emotions she did not yet understand. At the University of Southern California, she studied cinema and journalism, hoping to escape into ideas and creativity. But even then, she felt miscast in her own life, never fully belonging. She volunteered at a small Beverly Hills theater, sweeping floors, organizing props, and staying after hours just to watch rehearsals. She did not imagine herself on stage, at least not yet. She was simply drawn to the intensity of storytelling, to the way actors transformed, to the way narrative could turn pain into meaning. Fate intervened when a talent agent noticed her quietly lingering in the back rows. Her presence, mysterious still, yet simmering, caught his attention. He asked her to audition, and she hesitated. She had not dreamed of acting, but something in her, something restless and unclaimed, pushed her toward the unknown. Her entry into Hollywood felt like slipping into cold water. She began with small television roles in the late 1970s, working in shows like Barrere and The Amazing Spider-Man. Barely recognized, barely remembered. Each job was a fragile stepping stone, each audition a test of herself. She struggled with anxiety, with fear of being inadequate, with the sense that she was always performing, even off-screen. Casting directors often saw her as too reserved, too introspective, too emotionally closed. But some saw mystery in her, an intensity she did not yet know how to harness. Through the early 1980s, she acted in television films, learning the mechanics of performance, how to hide vulnerability behind expression, how to channel emotion into story rather than into herself. But financial pressure mounted. Hollywood was unforgiving to young women who did not promote themselves relentlessly. She lived modestly, auditioned constantly, absorbed rejection after rejection, and wondered whether the dream she never originally had was slipping away before it began. Then, in 1982, something shifted. She married actor Brian Benbin, a grounded presence who offered stability amid chaos. Yet even marriage did not quiet her hunger. She wanted her work to matter. She wanted her performances to mean something more than just pretty faces on glossy posters. She once admitted she feared being typecast, trapped, or forgotten. 3 curses Hollywood loved to inflict on actresses. But destiny was quietly gathering its momentum. Her breakthrough did not come with thunder. It came with a script handed to her in 1986, a film called Stakeout. She almost didn't take it, unsure if the role would elevate her career or confine her to simplistic characters. But when the film was released on August 5, 1987, everything changed. Stakeout became the #1 movie in America. Madeleine's face was suddenly unmistakable. The quiet, introverted girl, who once hid behind a piano, had transformed into a rising Hollywood star. But fame came with its own storm. Since she was only beginning to understand, fame arrived for her, not as a gentle sunrise, but as a sudden, disorienting flash. After the success of August 5, 1987, the world no longer looked at Madeleine Stowe the way it once had. She felt the shift the first time a crowd gathered outside a studio gate, calling her name with a familiarity that unsettled her. Hollywood, with its shimmering facades and hollow promises, had finally opened its gates to her. But, as she stepped inside, she sensed not triumph, but an invisible tightening around her spirit. Fame could exalt, but it could also consume. And she felt its dual nature from the beginning. Producers saw her as a rare combination of beauty and seriousness. A woman who could elevate a role rather than simply fill it. Yet Madeleine sensed the unspoken expectations. She was expected to smile more, reveal less, charm effortlessly, and accept that a portion of her identity now belonged to strangers. Photographers captured her at angles meant to feed fantasies. Interviewers leaned toward the personal rather than the artistic. She learned quickly that Hollywood's affection was conditional, fragile, and easily lost. Still, her career ignited. Scripts poured in, each bearing the weight of new possibilities. The early 1990s became her era of ascent. With each film, she excavated deeper emotional layers, seeking characters who spoke to the parts of her soul she kept hidden in real life. It was 1992 that carved her into Hollywood memory when she appeared in The Last of the Mohicans. Directed by Michael Mann and released on September 25, 1992, the film became a sweeping epic of loss, survival, and forbidden passion. As Cora Monroe, she carried a quiet fire. Viewers saw not just elegance, but a fierce vulnerability. A woman caught between worlds, holding her own against danger and tragedy. The intensity felt real, because she lent pieces of her private pain to the shadows of her father's illness, echoes of her childhood anxieties, the familiar fear of losing the people she loved. The audience felt her truth, even if they never knew its origin. Then came October 1, 1993. The release of Robert Altman's Shortcuts, the ensemble masterpiece that pulled her into a darker emotional landscape. Her performance was stripped of glamour, raw and unsettling. The film earned critical reverence, and Madeleine, often soft-spoken in interviews, was suddenly discussed by critics as an actress of extraordinary depth. Yet with every accolade, a quiet unease grew inside her. She once hinted, in an offhand comment, that she felt Hollywood was more interested in projecting fantasies than revealing humanity. And the disconnect left her restless. Her next wave arrived in 1995 with 12 Monkeys, a dystopian psychological thriller released on December 29, 1995. As Dr. Catherine Raleigh, she carried the burden of a world unraveling, her eyes reflecting both fear and reluctant hope. The role demanded a sustained emotional intensity that pushed her to edges she rarely visited. And though the performance became iconic, the experience drained her. She would later describe the film as transformative but exhausting, a project that left echoes in her mind long after filming had ended. Success had become a double-edged sword. The roles were richer, the acclaim louder, yet she felt increasingly hollow behind the scenes. As the mid-90s unfolded, she sensed an invisible tension in her career. Hollywood, captivated by youth, beauty, and reinvention, offered her roles filled with danger and desire, but rarely allowed her the complexity she craved. She wanted characters with bruises, with secrets, with contradictions. Instead, she was often pushed toward roles that demanded a flawless exterior. The industry that called her brilliant also tried to confine her. The quiet rebel inside her began to stir. Then the world outside her work shifted dramatically. Her daughter was born in 1996, and for the first time, she felt a love that eclipsed every spotlight. The moment she held her child, something rearranged inside her. The noise of Hollywood, once intoxicating, now felt like static. In interviews, she hinted that motherhood awakened an almost primal need for privacy and grounding. The constant travel, the scrutiny, the manufactured glamour known of it aligned with the life she wanted for her family. So in late 1996, at the height of her fame, Madeleine did something Hollywood rarely forgives. She stepped away. It was not a public announcement, no farewell interview, no teary press release. She simply retreated, slipping quietly into a life far from cameras. She and Brian Benben moved to a ranch outside Fredericksburg, Texas, exchanging film sets for open fields, dense oaks, and the unhurried cadence of rural life. The solitude felt like exhaling after holding her breath for years. She spent her days caring for her daughter, tending to the land, and rediscovering the parts of herself that fame had hollowed out. But leaving Hollywood came with its own shadows. She sensed the tremors of anxiety returning, the ones she had battled in her youth. She feared she might never find her way back, feared she had allowed herself to be forgotten. The world of acting had once been a refuge, a place where she poured her inner storms into story. Now she wondered what remained of that calling. In the quiet of Texas nights, as cicadas hummed and stars scattered across the dark sky, she confronted the question that haunted her entire adult life. Who was she, without the roles, the scripts, the characters? Who was she when the world was not watching? The next few years became a fragile balancing act between motherhood and the faint pull of her profession. She returned only for projects that intrigued her. The General's Daughter, in June 1999. A role filled with moral conflict and buried trauma. We Were Soldiers, in March 2002, where she portrayed a woman holding her family together amid the devastation of war. Yet even these performances bore a subtle melancholy, as if she were giving the world glimpses of a brilliance she no longer wished to display fully. Hollywood had lost its grip on her. The silence of her ranch held her more tightly, though she attempted small returns. She remained a ghost to the industry, an enigma audiences remembered but could no longer trace, and for a time, that obscurity became its own kind of refuge. But the story of Madeleine Stowe was far from finished. The world had not seen her final transformation. Her quiet withdrawal would soon collide with a new era of television, and the woman who once vanished from Hollywood would return with a vengeance that no one anticipated. The years drifted quietly as Madeleine lived away from the glare of the industry, her days marked by the soft rhythms of ranch life, rather than the relentless tempo of Hollywood. Yet, even in her chosen obscurity, the world she had once stepped away from lingered like a faint echo at the edges of her mind. She read scripts occasionally, turning pages slowly, searching for a role that felt worth rupturing the peaceful silence she had earned, but nothing called to her strongly enough. She had spent too many years shaping characters that mirrored emotional turmoil. Now she guarded her calm like something sacred. Still, a part of her wondered if the chapter of reinvention was waiting for her, quietly forming in the distant corridors of a changing entertainment landscape. Once considered a step down from film, was beginning to transform in the late 2000s. Writers were crafting darker, morally complex narratives that pushed beyond the boundaries of traditional storytelling. Characters were no longer heroic or villainous. They lived in the murky shadows where choices blurred and motives tangled. It was a world that suited Madeleine's emotional depth, but she remained silent, watching the shift from afar, believing her time had passed. Hollywood had a short memory, especially for actresses who had stepped away on their own terms. She accepted that she had become a figure of nostalgia rather than contemporaneity, a name people remembered with fondness rather than expectation. Then came September 21st, 2011, the day ABC reached out with an offer that would alter the course of her quiet life. They wanted her for a new drama, a modern retelling of revenge and power set against the gilded opulence of the Hamptons. The script for Revenge arrived at her Texas home like a storm waiting to break. As she read the pages, she felt a slow awakening, a stirring she had not felt in years. The character Victoria Grayson was a woman of elegance and ruthlessness, a matriarch forged by secrets, traumas, betrayals, and the intoxicating dance of power. Victoria was not perfect. She was a living storm, a woman driven by fear, love, ambition, and the ghosts of her past. Madeleine recognized the psychological density instantly. It was the kind of role she had waited decades for. A character who allowed her to explore darkness without losing humanity. Accepting meant uprooting her life again. It meant leaving the ranch, returning to long production days, facing the press, cameras, and scrutiny. She hesitated for weeks, torn between two versions of herself. Finally, she realized that her daughter was old enough, her home stable enough, and her own heart restless enough. Madeleine said yes, and with that, she stepped back into an industry that had not seen her in nearly a decade. When Revenge premiered on September 21, 2011, audiences were captivated. The series became an instant sensation, its world of secrets and duplicity pulling viewers into a labyrinth of hidden motives. At the center, Madeleine Stowe emerged like a force of nature. Victoria Grayson was icy but wounded, powerful yet haunted. The venom in her gaze, the quiver beneath her composure, the sophisticated menace threaded into every glance was a performance that felt operatic. Critics called her mesmerizing, magnetic, unforgettable. She was nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Actress in early 2012, marking one of the most celebrated comebacks of the decade. But the resurgence came with unexpected pressure. Fame, which she had once fled from, found her again with renewed intensity. She was photographed everywhere, invited to events, and interviewed about her decade-long disappearance. Some reporters probed too deeply, asking about her father's death in 1983, about the anxiety that had gripped her as a young actress, about the rumors that she had struggled with the emotional toll of Hollywood. She answered carefully, often redirecting the conversation, unwilling to let the world pry open parts of her that had taken years to heal. Behind the scenes of Revenge, she threw herself into her work with a seriousness that sometimes unsettled her castmate. According to sources close to the production, she carried Victoria's emotions with her, even after shooting ended, the weight of the character lingering in her posture and voice. Some believed her intensity reflected her own fears about returning to fame, while others whispered that she was battling a private exhaustion that crept into the edges of her performance. The long shooting hours, the emotional demands, and the pressure to maintain the show's seductive poise slowly took a toll. By the time the series reached its later seasons in 2014 and 2015, she felt a familiar strain, the quiet sense that she was losing parts of herself to the role. Yet she pushed forward, determined to finish the story with dignity and conviction. When the show concluded on May 10, 2015, she felt both relief and a poignant ache. She had given Victoria Grayson everything she had, and now she was left with the emptiness that often follows the end of something all-consuming. After the finale, Madeleine stepped back once again, but this time with less certainty about what came next. Her mother had passed away in 2016, and the grief hollowed her in ways she did not immediately understand. She spoke less publicly, traveled sparingly, and retreated into a quieter, more contemplative life. Interviews hinted at the emotional fatigue she carried, the sense that she had spent decades wrestling with her own vulnerability through the characters she portrayed. In the years that followed, she rarely appeared on screen, choosing instead to dedicate her time to philanthropy, particularly her work in Haiti. She returned there repeatedly after her first visit in 2010, helping build clinics, supporting trauma programs, and lending her voice to those forgotten by global attention. The woman once known for her elegance and enigmatic presence had shifted into a figure defined by empathy and resilience, finding meaning in service rather than fame. Yet, even now, a veil surrounds her. She remains present but distant, visible yet mysterious, a Hollywood figure who refuses to conform to the industry's expectations. Her story is not one of downfall, but of deliberate disappearance and selective reemergence. A woman constantly choosing her own narrative rather than surrendering to the one imposed upon her. And still, a lingering question hangs in the air, one whispered by fans and critics alike. After all the transformations, all the ascents and withdrawals, who has Madeleine Stowe finally become? And what part of her story remains untold? Hollywood had a strange way of forgetting people the moment they stepped out of the spotlight. And for Madeleine Stowe, disappearing wasn't an accident. It was a choice. But choices born from pain always leave shadows behind. After the success of The Last of the Mohicans and 12 Monkeys, Madeleine's face became a signature of silent intensity, a beauty that didn't scream for attention but drew eyes anyway. Directors wanted her. Studios wrote scripts with her name printed on the first page even before the story existed. But at home, behind the manicured lawns and quiet nights of her California estate, a storm was gathering, one that would swallow her career whole. Her husband, the cinematographer Brian Benben, had an accident, sudden, shattering, and terrifying accident in a way that the public never fully understood. Hollywood reported it as a temporary setback. Friends whispered that it was worse, but Madeleine knew the truth. His recovery needed a guardian, not a celebrity, and so she walked away. No dramatic press release, no farewell interview, just the soft closing of a door, and silence. 1 year became 2, 2 became 10, and Hollywood forgot her. Paparazzi called her disappearance mysterious. Insiders called it career suicide. But none of them knew the real story. The midnight hospital visits, the days spent learning how to care for him, the nights she sat by his bedside, wondering if she'd ever return to the world she once ruled. Her absence became a legend. Directors kept sending offers, scripts for thrillers, romances, period dramas. Each one returned unopened. It was as if her name had turned into a ghost floating through Hollywood corridors, remembered but unreachable. Meanwhile, Madeleine retreated far from the spotlight, into a world that didn't care about fame, a world where she rescued horses. She worked on humanitarian causes quietly, where she finally allowed herself to breathe without cameras watching. She became a myth. The star who walked away at the height of her power, a woman who chose real life over real life. And in that long silence, a question began to rise. Was Madeleine Stowe gone forever? Or was Hollywood simply waiting for her to return? For more than a decade, Madeleine Stowe lived like a shadow present, breathing. But far from the world that once memorized her every expression, Hollywood had moved on. New faces replaced old legends, and the industry assumed she would never come back. But destiny has a habit of knocking, even on doors long closed. The call arrived one quiet evening, a script, a character, a woman soaked in trauma, rage, and buried sorrow. Someone who had survived hell and carried the scars in her eyes. It wasn't just a role, it was Madeleine's reflection. The show was called Revenge, a tale of power, betrayal, and cold, calculated fury. Producers didn't expect her to accept. Some didn't even believe she'd read it. But she did. Every page, every line, every broken heartbeat the character carried. In that moment, something inside her woke up. Not the old hunger for fame, but the artist she had abandoned. The storyteller had gone silent too long, that when she walked onto set for the first time in years, the entire crew fell silent. It wasn't just her beauty, still sharp, still haunting. It was the aura she carried. A woman who had lived a life with real pain and real sacrifice. A woman who had nothing left to prove. Her performance was raw, unfiltered, almost frightening in its authenticity. Critics said she didn't just act, she bled through her character. Fans who had never seen her films were suddenly obsessed. Old fans felt like a lost star had finally returned to the night sky. Hollywood called it a comeback. But for Madeleine, it wasn't that at all. It was a closure, a reminder that talent never dies, even if fame does. In interviews, she remained graceful, quiet, and protective of her private life. But behind her soft voice was the steel of a woman who had carried the weight of real tragedy and walked through the fire without burning. After Revenge, she didn't cling to the momentum. She didn't chase roles. She chose only the stories that stirred something inside her and discarded the rest. Because Madeleine Stowe had learned something the hard way. Fame is loud, but survival is silent. Her return wasn't the roar of a forgotten star, it was the calm, powerful heartbeat of a woman who never needed Hollywood, but Hollywood still needed her. Fame had once been the storm that swept Madeleine Stowe into the sky, but in her later years, she chose something different. A life defined not by the noise of Hollywood, but by the quiet she had been denied for decades. After Revenge reignited her presence, people expected a full resurgence, a return to constant screen appearances and glamorous events. Instead, she stepped back again, deliberately, almost ritualistically, as if protecting something fragile inside her. She appeared occasionally, a rare interview, a charity event, a quiet red carpet walk. But each moment carried the unmistakable aura of someone who had learned the true cost of attention. There was a softness in her now, but also a deeper gravity. She spoke about grief without theatrics, about love without sentimentality, about the industry with a calm far more powerful than anger. Her past had shaped her, but it no longer defined her. She understood that Hollywood's memory is short, its affection temporary, and its loyalty conditional. Yet she never showed bitterness. Instead, she treated her career as something sacred, a chapter, not the whole book. As years passed, fans began revisiting her earlier films, discovering the emotional intelligence she had always brought to every role. Younger audiences found her through streaming platforms, calling her underrated, mysterious, a face you can't forget. Directors who had once overlooked her spoke openly about wanting to work with her again, but Madeleine chose her appearances with care, preferring roles that carried emotional weight, that allowed her to explore human complexity rather than chase relevance. She poured much of her time into humanitarian work, especially projects addressing mental health and trauma subjects she understood with intimate clarity. According to people close to her, this work mattered to her more than any award ever could. It was as if she had redirected all the empathy she carried on screen into the real world, where the cameras did not follow. There were still rumors, of course. Hollywood never forgets how to whisper. Some said she was writing a book. Others claimed she was quietly mentoring young actors, guiding them through an industry that devours innocence quickly and without remorse. A few believed she was preparing for one last, groundbreaking role. Madeleine herself never confirmed anything. She allowed mystery to surround her, and that mystery became part of her legacy. Her final major public appearance, on November 10, 2019, revealed a woman who had aged with startling grace, not untouched by time, but defined by it. The lines around her eyes tell stories of laughter, grief, grounding, and survival. Reporters described her presence as timeless, elegant, and enigmatic. She smiled gently on the carpet, the kind of smile that held both sorrow and peace. Then she disappeared again, dissolving back into the quiet life she had chosen. If Madeleine Stowe's story teaches anything, it is that the greatest battles are not fought in front of cameras, but in the spaces between them, the moments where no one is watching, when a person must decide who they truly are. She had walked through loss, through darkness, through the crushing weight of Hollywood's expectations. She had risen, fallen, withdrawn, returned, and finally transformed into something more than a star, a woman who owned her story. And perhaps that is why she remains unforgettable, not because she chased the light, but because she carried her own. She lived with restraint, loved with depth, and survived with quiet strength. And long after the credits of her life's films fade, the mystery of Madeleine Stowe endures as a reminder that some stars burn brightest, not when they are seen, but when they are remembered. The sun set slowly over the Texas ranch, casting long shadows across fields Madeleine had walked for decades. The world outside continued its relentless motion, chasing new faces, fresh scandals, and the glitter of Hollywood's fleeting promises. But she moved through her days with a quiet assurance. It was in these solitary walks, among the oak trees and the whispering winds, that she finally reconciled the life she had lived. Fame, tragedy, passion, loss, love, and retreat all had been chapters in a story that only she could fully comprehend. The cameras had come and gone, the applause faded, but the lessons endured, etched into her being as deeply as any scar. She had loved and lost, embraced roles that demanded emotional excavation, and walked away from the industry that had threatened to consume her. She had returned on her own terms, proving that her talent was not a relic, but a force still capable of riveting audiences. And yet, she understood something Hollywood seldom teaches. Control over one's life, one's narrative, and one's boundaries is the most elusive triumph of all. Madeleine's story was not defined by the awards she did or did not receive, the fame she once held, or the projects that carried her name in lights. It was defined by the power to endure, the courage to step away, the strength to return when it mattered most, and the wisdom to know when to disappear again. Even now, her image lingers on screens, in remembered films, in quiet recollections whispered amongst it. She is recalled as elegant, enigmatic, magnetic, and complicated. But the truth of her life, the private victories and battles, the careful cultivation of silence and autonomy, is something the public may never fully grasp. It is in this tension between the known and the unknowable that her story attains its cinematic perfection, the quiet pulse of mystery that refuses closure. Madeleine Stowe exists as both legend and enigma, a figure who has navigated the treacherous corridors of fame, love, and tragedy, emerging not broken, but transformed. And so, as the final light falls across her life, we return to the question first posed years ago. Who is she, truly? The actress who captivated millions, the woman who retreated into obscurity, the humanitarian, the mother, the artist who lived by her own code. All these facets coexist in a delicate, haunting balance. She is not a cautionary tale, nor merely a star remembered for beauty or fame. She is proof that survival, integrity, and the choice to define oneself are sometimes the greatest acts of artistry imaginable. Madeleine Stowe's legacy is neither loud nor easily summarized. It is the quiet power of a life lived deliberately, the shadowed brilliance of someone who understood that mystery, patience, and authenticity can endure longer than the fleeting glare of Hollywood lights. And in that endurance lies the lasting truth. Some stars do not fade. They simply choose when and how to shine.